Today was a monumental loss for prosecutors in the Diddy case. They were, I wish there were a bigger word than the word losers, because that's what they are. This case would never have been brought if the only issues were whether he transported a sex worker across state lines to have sex. There is no way they would have done it. I mean, you look at this case, and they had 70 Homeland Security agents at Diddy's homes in Miami and LA, and they spent a fortune putting this case together.
To a lot of you, this was a shock. As this trial unfolded, I can't sit up here and say to you today that it's a shock. Because time and time and time again, we repeatedly asked on this show, where is the case for trafficking being made? Where is the case for racketeering and those RICO charges? Where is that being made? And the jury spoke earlier today and said it wasn't made. Not enough to our satisfaction. And as a result, we are going to let him out. What exactly did they let him out on? Let's go over that again.
A not guilty verdict on racketeering. A not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie. A not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Jane. Those were the reasons why this case was brought. They said he was a racketeer. The jury said no. They said that he was Cassie and coercing Cassie and Jane and forcing them into these freak-offs. The jury didn't buy it.
The trial of Sean Diddy Combs, which has stretched over several months, is now reaching its conclusion, and doing so in a highly dramatic way. What began as a tense legal battle with prosecutors presenting serious allegations is now unraveling. The key cases that once anchored the prosecution's argument are falling apart one after another, leaving their strategy weakened. Most notably, the jury has dismissed the trafficking charge involving Casey and Jane, which was a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. But the most significant development? The dismissal of the RICO charges against Diddy, charges that were central to the entire trial. So, what does this mean moving forward for Diddy and this case? Let's break it down.
I'm with Johnson in New York. We're coming on the air right now because the federal judge in the Sean Diddy Combs trial has just denied bail for Combs hours after a split verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking case against him. On the third day of deliberations, the jury finding Combs not guilty on 3 of 5 counts, acquitting him of the most serious charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. Combs guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each count carries a maximum of up to 10 years behind bars.
Diddy has experienced a surprising turn of fortune in this trial. Although he was convicted on 2 of the 5 original charges, he successfully avoided 2 of the most serious ones. The racketeering and sex trafficking allegations, especially involving Jane and Casey Ventura, were both thrown out. That marks a major victory for his defense. Still, the battle isn't over. Diddy was convicted on 2 counts related to the transportation for prostitution, each potentially carrying a sentence of up to 10 years. While these aren't as severe as the ones he escaped, they still cast uncertainty over his future. Following the 3 favorable outcomes, Diddy swiftly filed a bail request ahead of sentencing on the remaining 2 convictions. Buoyed by the verdicts, he contacted his family, hopeful and confident that bail would be granted, allowing him to stay out of jail while awaiting sentencing. But that hope was quickly dashed when the judge denied the request, citing the defense's failure to present strong enough arguments to justify bail at this stage. So, despite some courtroom wins, Diddy remains in custody for now, facing the next phase of the legal process without the option of release.
Sean Combs entered court just a moment ago, Whit, looking upbeat. He greeted his family, who crammed into the gallery, all in one bench, his mother, sons, twin daughters. And I think he was anticipating that he would be released following the mixed verdict, especially the acquittal on all of the violent crimes. But the judge immediately sat down at the bench, started reading his decision, saying bail is denied. He would not be released prior to sentencing because the judge said his incarceration is required based on what he was convicted of. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution. The judge said the defense did not make any successful arguments to say that that expectation should be overridden.
Stephen A. Smith shared his candid take on the case and its unexpected developments. From the outset, he said he never believed the racketeering and trafficking charges against Diddy would hold. According to Smith, prosecutors had tried to tie the transportation charges into a broader racketeering narrative, but that connection never truly came together. As he put it, the jury's verdict made things clear. The prosecution failed to present enough convincing evidence to support those bigger claims.
To a lot of you, this was a shock. As this trial unfolded, I can't sit up here and say to you today that it's a shock. Because time and time again, we repeatedly asked on this show, where is the case for trafficking being made? Where is the case for racketeering and those RICO charges? Where is that being made? And the jury spoke earlier today and said it wasn't made. Not enough to our satisfaction. And as a result, we are going to let him out. What exactly did they let him out on? Let's go over that again.
Stephen A. Smith continued by noting that more and more analysts are viewing this trial as a major victory for Diddy. Those he's spoken with believe that in the larger context, Diddy might not end up serving anywhere near the maximum 10 years, especially when compared to the life sentence he once faced. In fact, there's even speculation from some circles that he may never spend any time behind bars at all. According to Stephen A., this dramatic shift in outlook stems directly from the prosecution's failure to build a solid, compelling case. Despite the severity of the allegations, they couldn't make them stick. Ultimately, their inability to convincingly prove the charges may not only have spared Diddy a life sentence, but might actually allow him to walk free. The tone around the case has shifted significantly, and attention has now turned to just how decisive a win this might be for the music mogul.
Worst case scenario is that he could be sentenced to 10 years in prison for each, okay? And that he could face up to 20 years. Everybody that I've spoken to, and I'm about to bring you two legal experts to explain all of this to you. Everybody that I've spoken to said, forget 20 years. He's not even getting 10. In all likelihood, it won't be 5. And there's a slim possibility that he'll get 2 to 3 years. So you've got people out there speculating that it could be 1 to 0 as it pertains to the amount of time that P. Diddy spends in jail. Why on earth would that happen?
Diddy's attorney, Mark Agnafilo, addressed the media following the verdict, calling the result a tremendous victory over the prosecution. He stated that prosecutors had exhausted every possible strategy in an effort to bring Diddy down, but in his words, they failed to stop him. He also took a moment to commend the jury for their diligence, saying they paid close attention to every piece of evidence laid before them.
Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens. And we had a wonderful jury. They listened to every word, and they got the situation right, or certainly right enough. They acquitted him of the sex trafficking, which he was absolutely innocent of. They acquitted him of the racketeering conspiracy that he was absolutely innocent of.
Agnafilo emphasized that the jury's decision to acquit Diddy of both the racketeering and trafficking charges was not just a win, it was confirmation that his client had been wrongfully accused. He asserted that the outcome validated their defense and demonstrated that truth had ultimately prevailed. According to Agnafilo, this verdict reaffirmed Diddy's innocence and showcased the prosecution's failure to make their case stick.
And all of the components to it. The kidnapping, he was innocent of that. The arson, he was innocent of that. The obstructing justice, he was innocent of that. And that is no longer just me saying that. That is the verdict of our jury.
During his closing arguments, Agnifilo had already anticipated the case's trajectory. The defense came out forcefully, criticizing the prosecution for exaggerating their claims and strongly challenging the charges of racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation for prostitution. Agnifilo argued that there was insufficient evidence to support the accusations. He went further, branding the trial as fundamentally flawed, built more on assumption than fact. He made it clear that Diddy's lifestyle, a focal point of the prosecution's argument, was entirely consensual and best described as a swinger's lifestyle, not a criminal enterprise.
I'm going to list a couple of things that we're hearing about inside of the courtroom because it's Mark Agnifilo who is delivering these remarks. And he's telling this jury that this was the prosecution's attempt to criminalize kinky sex preferences and drug use, that the bedroom, the intimate part of this defendant's life, is what is being criminalized here, that it's not racketeering. He says witnesses have been taking the stand and none of them have said, yes, I am part of a racketeering enterprise. He talks about this being a lifestyle, swingers, threesomes, but essentially it's being described as him mocking the government for an exaggerated trial.
The defense reinforced its position by forcefully challenging the prosecution's interpretation of Diddy's private life. A particular focus was placed on the so-called freak-offs, which the prosecution had portrayed as evidence of criminal conduct. Agnifilo tackled this head-on, arguing that these events were entirely consensual. To strengthen their argument, the defense introduced text messages and video evidence that, according to Agnifilo, illustrated mutual participation. These materials were presented to show that the women involved were not victims of coercion or trafficking, but rather willing participants. The defense's goal was clear: to dismantle the prosecution's claims by highlighting the voluntary nature of these encounters and proving there was no criminality behind Diddy's personal lifestyle.
Then what he was doing is bringing up some evidence of a text that the prosecutors used yesterday from Sean Diddy Combs, which was in August, in which the prosecutors were saying this is a confession of that. And Mark Agnifilo brought that text up and said, nowhere in here could anyone indicate that this would be a confession to a rape of any sort of, from any sort of the imagination. What it is him just saying, I wasn't able to turn you on, etc. He said, how could anyone get in there, get from that was a confession of a rape? So basically what he's doing, Julia, so far to the jurors, is just trying to tear apart the credibility of Cassie Ventura and their relationship.
Now that the trial is nearing its end, many are analyzing what went wrong for the prosecution. One prominent perspective comes from Harvey Levin of TMZ, who pointed out a significant flaw in their approach. Levin argued that prosecutors wasted valuable time emphasizing private and irrelevant details such as the use of baby oil instead of focusing on substantial legal grounds that could have supported their case. By getting sidetracked with sensational elements, he said, the prosecution missed the opportunity to build a coherent narrative and establish the necessary connections between claims. This miscalculation, according to Levin, was a critical factor in the case's collapse.
Where the U.S. attorney spent time talking about baby oil. And when I heard him talking about baby oil, I'm just thinking, what does this have to do with a federal prosecution? Yes, it's salacious, but what does it have to do with 70 Homeland Security agents? Now look, and I'm not saying Cassie wasn't abused. We know she was abused. We saw the Intercontinental Hotel video, but he wasn't being prosecuted for that.
Harvey Levin continued his breakdown of the trial, acknowledging that while certain pieces of evidence may have raised eyebrows, the RICO charges were overblown. He conceded that Diddy may have made questionable choices, but trying to cast him as the head of a criminal organization was, in his view, a serious overreach. Levin emphasized that the actions tied to Diddy lacked the organization and coordination typically required to meet the legal threshold for a criminal enterprise. He concluded that the prosecution's decision to pursue RICO charges without sufficient proof played a major role in weakening their entire case.
To say this dude was a racketeer, he's a bad guy, and I think a criminal. He's committed a lot of crimes along the way. But a racketeer? And again, I will say this one more time. A racketeer is somebody in organized crime. This was disorganized crime. This was a jealous, crazy, even criminal boyfriend who is so crazed that burglarize Kid Cudi's house or maybe blow up the car and kill somebody and give them a lie detector test. But there's no enterprise. It's not Bad Boy Records. That's not what Bad Boy Records was doing. It was a crazed boyfriend who was doing this.
It wasn't only Harvey Levin who observed a shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. One particular juror stood out for holding firm to his position, even as the rest of the jury appeared to be moving in the opposite direction. According to Levin, this wasn't an average juror. He was reportedly a well-educated individual who thoroughly examined the evidence and developed a viewpoint that seemingly supported Diddy. What's more, other jurors were said to be actively trying to persuade this lone holdout, attempting to bring him in line with the group's consensus. But despite their efforts, he stood his ground, refusing to be pressured or influenced. This sparked widespread debate both inside the courtroom and among outside observers. Was his resistance a display of moral conviction or a sign of division within the jury that could complicate the path to a unanimous decision? The tension was undeniable. Levin even hinted that the disagreement may have gone beyond differing interpretations, suggesting that the juror possibly disagreed with it. Rest on a crucial component of the case, potentially one of the main criminal charges against Diddy.
Where a juror says, I don't care what the judge is telling me. The right thing to do is something else. That's what it's feeling like to me.
So if you're going to guess here, it's that the 11 are saying convict him on one of the
something.
Counts.
That's what it feels like to me.
So when the note was handed to the judge explained what was going on to the prosecutors and to Diddy's defense. They all came up and had a meeting about this. What Mark Agnifilo, Diddy's co-lead attorney, said was, just tell them it's really early, Judge, and they should get back to.
Even though Diddy may have secured a favorable outcome in the criminal trial, his legal challenges are far from over. A civil lawsuit still awaits, and this could pose a different kind of threat. Unlike the criminal case, the civil trial doesn't involve jail time, but it could bring serious financial consequences. If found liable, Diddy could face substantial monetary damages. This civil suit presents a new legal battleground, one that could significantly affect his financial standing. So while he may have avoided the harshest penalties in court, the next phase could still leave a lasting impact on his future, depending on how the civil proceedings unfold.
So while he's out of the woods, she still has those civil lawsuits. However, it's important to know when you're talking about civil lawsuits, you're talking about money. So he's out of the woods in the sense of that his liberty is no longer at stake. Probably his financial status is at stake, but not his liberty. Also important to remember that when we're talking about those civil lawsuits, while he may have escaped criminal liability, the burden of proof is completely different when it comes to civil lawsuits. It's by preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. 51% to 49% of whether he's liable on those counts that the lawsuit is based on, as opposed to in the criminal world, it was beyond a reasonable doubt.
As the trial of Sean Diddy Combs approaches its conclusion, it's evident that the legal proceedings have been intense, filled with dramatic developments that kept the public watching closely. Despite facing life-altering allegations, Diddy's legal team successfully deconstructed the prosecution's arguments, securing acquittals on major charges like racketeering and sex trafficking. The jury's decision to dismiss these key accusations and the prosecution's failure to convincingly link the transportation charges to any organized criminal operation has clearly shifted momentum in Diddy's favor. However, this courtroom victory doesn't mark the end of his legal troubles. The looming civil lawsuit still poses a significant threat. Although his freedom may no longer be in jeopardy, the case could carry heavy financial consequences, potentially damaging both his wealth and reputation. If the claims in the civil suit gain legal traction, Diddy may be facing serious financial fallout. A defining aspect of the trial was the role of the jury, particularly the one juror who refused to accept the idea that Diddy led a criminal organization. His steadfast stance exposed potential weaknesses in the prosecution's case and may have significantly influenced the verdict. The case has ignited widespread discussion about the justice system and the effectiveness of the evidence presented. Many observers believe prosecutors focus too much on sensational aspects instead of building a solid, fact-based case. In the end, Diddy managed to avoid the harshest outcomes, but uncertainty still lies ahead. The civil trial represents the next chapter in this ongoing saga, and only time will reveal what it means for his future. What's your take on the verdict in Sean Diddy Combs' trial? Do you think the prosecution lacked a strong case, or should Diddy have been found guilty on some charges? What are your thoughts on the jury's role, especially the juror who stood firm? And with the civil lawsuit approaching, what do you predict is next for Diddy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective on this high-profile legal battle.